This is the voice of freedom. We are not one voice. We are many. We If there is only one thing you need to learn and understand about Magna Carta 1215, it's this. Magna Carta 1215 is the sole peaceful means known to humankind by which the rights of the weakest, most innocent citizens can prevail over a massive, potentially corrupt and oppressive state power. This is the voice of freedom, Magna Carta 1215 Learning Centre. Welcome to your next lesson with hosts Fitzroy and Carl. Must be Monday night. Welcome along, folks. Hope you've had a good week. And if you're into a little bit of extra learning tonight, Magna Carta 1215 Learning Centre, lesson number 6. We're into part 3, I think, tonight of rights. And the bloke taking us through it all is Fitzroy Sterling. How are you, Fitz?
Good evening, my friend. Sorry, I've been let down by technology again. So, yeah, if you wonder why we're late, that's on my old girl. She's just not living up to the standard that I needed to. So, apologies again, guys.
Yes, we're going to have to get a new bit of visualization going to get you a new computer. I think the rubber bands inside the one you've got are just about worn out.
Yeah, that's right. It's the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, she's very full up, I'm sure of that.
Yes.
All right, we got a pile of slides to get into tonight, so let's kick it all off. So, a bit of a refresh from where we left off last week, if you would.
Yeah, so we finished up in the whole order following. I'm pretty sure that's where we sort of left off, and also, how the military is appropriated for and what the military could be turned into, being as far as problem solving. So we sort of finished up on that aspect. And so today we're going to still carry on with a bit of that order following to do with the police. We're going to go into a bit more detail. But first we need to explain the whole thing about the Constitution and what we think is a Constitution, which it isn't. So we're going to go into detail of that and how the whole learning process and the whole way by which our consciousness is subverted, how it happens. So people believe that which they in their hearts know is not true, yet they'll still somehow fall for the way they're tricked into believing it. So we're going to go and uncover and unveil how that all happens.
All right. Without further ado, let's get into it. I'll just stop my cam a little bit.
All right. So this is what I call sovereign knowledge. So if you've been following the previous sessions we've done, some of these things have already been defined. So I'm hoping you guys know how to answer this. But this is what I would say if you call yourself a sovereign. So the whole meaning of sovereign is someone who's above the rulership or control of another, right? So that means conditions where there's no masters and slaves. Well, you need to have a base level of knowledge to make sure that that can exist, right? So if you don't know the answer to these questions, then you can't actually express your sovereignty. It's not possible. So everything that happens in the physical realm has to start in the mental realm first. So if you don't have this knowledge, then you're going to constantly be tricked into being a good slave. And I know that word's very confronting for people, yet I don't really know another way to put it. So unfortunately, that's all I've got right now to work with.
Go with what you know.
Sorry, Carl?
Go with what you know.
All righty, too easy. So it's really important to be able to define law, because if you can't define law, you're going to get tricked into believing legislation is law. And the two things are so different. They're nothing like each other. So this is another question. These 7 questions, if you can answer them, they need to be answered by everyone else who you see that stands up and says that they're going to act in the service of people's freedoms. So all your sort of figures that your public figures, you need to ask them these questions and see if they can answer it too. That's how you know they're actually here to act in the service of your freedom. And if they can't answer these questions, then they're not going to be able to act in the service of your freedom. They're going to talk like it, but they're actually not going to be able to manifest it because they themselves don't know this. So these are really critical questions, right? So you need to be able to define law. You need to know what a constitution is and define it. Then you need to be able to know who has the authority to write one. That's critical. Then what is the defining principle of democracy, right? That's even more critical. A lot of people talk about democracy, but they don't actually know what it really means, right? They think it's voting, and it's not. And that's the majority, like the aggregate, That's the best answer you'll get from the aggregate. They think it's voting, and it's so not. Then the safeguard mechanism that protects we the people and our capacity for self-determination. That's how we are sovereign, right? So what is it that protects us to stay and remain in our natural state of sovereignty? What is that mechanism? You need to know what that is. So we can be self-governing, right? So we're not having rulers and masters tell us how to live our lives. So there's a mechanism by that, how that can happen. So that needs to be understood. And you need to know this stuff on a dime, right? A click of your fingers. It's not just, oh, I've got to think about it, let me think. It needs to come out naturally. Just like the way you speak your sentences comes out naturally, this too does. This does as well. So then this is a big one as well, right? What does the act to constitute the Commonwealth of Australia mean? So we're going to get into that one today. And that's really important. You guys can really know this and recite it on recall when you require it. And if we get time, if we don't, we'll need to go to next week. Really need to understand how to define the difference between knowledge and belief, right? This is how people come unstuck, because they don't know the difference. People will define belief as knowledge without realizing they're defining belief. And so if you don't know these things, you can't ask them of others, and then you won't know what kind of answer you're getting when you're asking the questions. Right? So this is how we can determine who it is that says they're for our freedom, yet do not have the capacity to actually act it out and manifest it. And if they don't have the capacity to act it out and manifest it, then they're not here for our freedom, because everything that happens has to be acted out in the physical realm. Otherwise, it's just a fantasy. Absolutely. So that's why I've put these here, and that's what I really want to try and work on tonight as well. So we can go to the next slide if you're ready, Carl. So here's, we're going to define the difference between who's in a low frequency and who's in a high vibrating frequency. So if you look at that black line, look at that as the line of truth. That's permanent and never changes, right? Truth doesn't matter what you believe, it's always true, right? You can destroy people, but you can't destroy truth, because that's out of our control. And so people who vibrate at a low frequency, as you see in the red, their belief systems and their perceptions cross the line of truth very rarely, but they still do, but just not that often, right? So, your easy example is everyone is lined up for these jabs and believes everything they're told by the television, right? That's your low frequency vibrations. Then you've got your mid frequency, it's when you're crossing, you can see how more often that the line gets crossed by your belief systems. And then you've got the high frequency, which obviously crosses that truth line a lot more often. So when people say you're vibrating at a high frequency or you're vibrating a low frequency, it's how often you intersect with the actual truth, that which is discoverable, not which you believe, right? So how often your perceptions align with truth. And the aim of why we're here is to align ourselves with truth more often. So someone who is vibrating a high vibration, you'll see that the pitch, the frequency of that pitch, the height of the pitch will be even shallower. That means that as soon as they cross over, they come back down and cross it again. So they're just crossing it really, really frequently. That's what's called a high vibration. So if you wondered when people talk about, vibrate high and stuff like that, it means how often their beliefs align themselves with truth. So that's what we're going to try and help you guys with tonight. All right, so you need to define what constitutional sovereignty means. So a monarch may be denoted as sovereign, but the constitutionally bound or symbolic monarch, so that's important, right? So this doesn't mean that they're actually some kind of preordained, by some belief structure, that they have some divine knowledge that no one else has. No, they're just there symbolically to represent something, and that is our capacity for self-determination. All they are is there to make sure it happens. That's their role.
That started with Ron.
Say again?
That started with Ron and the signing of Magna Carta.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was already in place, but all that was just to reaffirm the structure that was already in place. But obviously that monarch at the time, or the king, he'd actually gone AWOL and strayed from the constraints of what he was allowed to do. So then all that happened is they just made sure, the barons made sure that if he was going to keep his job, he was going to stay in alignment with the role that office holder has, and that is that they are too below the law. They are not above it, and they are bound by the law like everyone else. And the law is that which we agree to live under, right? The people, And so that was what all they did, is they reminded him, if you want to keep your job, then this is the contract that makes sure that you need to hold to, because the constraints are on them, you see, not on the people.
Yeah.
Those who want to act in the service of the people, the limits are on them. And that's what a constitution does. It limits them. And so as you can see here, so it says the monarch explicitly cedes sovereignty. So what that means is sovereignty is the ability to make and enforce the laws. Right? So that's really important you understand that, guys. Is sovereignty, the act of expressing sovereignty, is the ability of making and enforcing laws. And as we go further, you'll see why I've made a point of that. So let's move on if we can, Carl. All right. So this is going to be the bone of a lot of contention here. So a lot of people come to believe that the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act is our protection. It is so common, like beyond belief. So here we go, guys. We're going to dispel a few myths here. So we need to understand what that word act is there. Thank you, Carl. So what's an act? So we've been living in a system called inverted totalitarianism, right? So most of us know totalitarianism, the obvious one, is when the boot's on your throat. You can actually feel it, right? They, you know, like communism, what everyone calls communism, they see that, you know, the obvious version. Well, inverted totalitarianism is when the control's still there, you just can't see it. You actually believe that you're in charge of your choices, but you're actually not. So an act is a tactic of inverted totalitarianism. So what they do is they create pantomimes, theatre productions. Now, if you've heard me speak before, you would have heard me say that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. Well, there's a reason why that's been said. Because these people are really good at putting on a pantomime, these politicians. And so what they do is they put on an act that activates the audience's biases, right? They're telling you things you want to hear. They know you want to hear this. Right? So when you hear things that align themselves with your biases, you don't question, you just accept. So they're telling you things you want to hear, they're showing it to you, and your preferences and your sensitivities. And what that does is it triggers a feel-good emotional response that seduces the viewer into believing what they are viewing is a genuine, authentic, verifiable fact. So really think about that, guys. If someone's showing you, when you go to the movies, right, when they can actually act in a way that seems like you're relating to, you know, it's relatable, you start believing that they're actually showing you something real, like you're being drawn into it. You can identify with them.
And you don't have to go to the movies to see this. You just have to turn on the mainstream media news.
Correct. And so when this happened in 1901, this pantomime unveiled, and people fell for it because they were getting their triggers were, you know, their sensitivities, their preferences, their biases, right? They knew enough to put things in there that were going to trigger those things. And then what happens? It's like a mind control trick that's used to bypass one's innate capacity for critical thinking. So they didn't scrutinize it in depth because they didn't know what a real constitution was. So, you think they've come from a penal colony, right? They've got no idea what a true constitution is. So they're just going to accept things that sound like, you know, it's protecting them. But they didn't understand what was really happening. And the other thing is that in a true democracy, right, in a true functioning democracy, the parliament that comes after the previous one, they are actually not bound to uphold anything that the previous parliament did. They're not bound by that. They can change any acts because legislation is not permanent. They can change it all. They can wipe it all out. Well, no one taught us that, right? So we didn't know that. We just think, oh, once it's put through, legislation's put through and it's passed and enacted, that's it. It's permanent. No, it's not. And there's some of the things we don't know. So, you know, people who happen to be around in the 1900s, right, they voted for legislation, not for a constitution. And so this is something that a lot of people are going to have a lot of trouble getting their heads around. I can see the resistance now. So this is what you voted for, guys, right? Now, remember how I put that slide up about constitutional sovereignty, meaning that it's about who gets the power to make and enforce a law? Well, when everyone voted for this, they gave the power to who? Was it to the people or was it to the government? So let's have a look. This is the Judicature Act, right? The chapter about judicature. The judicial power of the Commonwealth shall be vested in a federal Supreme Court to be called the High Court of Australia, and in such other federal courts as the Parliament creates. So you see I've underlined it? The Parliament is creating its mechanism by which it's going to what? Create and enforce laws, not the people. So you see where the power is? The power is in the Parliament because they've granted it to themselves. And the people voted for that without realizing that's not democracy. Like, this is slavery. So if you are a proponent of the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, you're not going to like the next thing I'm about to say. However, it's verifiable truth that you can actually find out for yourself if you want to look. And you just have to look at what's happened to us today if you want any more evidence, right? Is that you voted for your own slavery because you don't have the power to make and enforce laws. Well, how can a fiction, right, that was created to serve us make and enforce laws? How? They're not the supreme power here. We are. We're the people that gave birth to government. So government can't control us. They have a function to fulfill, and that's what legislation is for, is how they're going to go and fulfill their function, not how they're going to control us. So they gave themselves the right to be sovereign and have sovereignty by creating their own courts. And it even says courts as invested in federal jurisdiction, you know, and at the bottom it says as Parliament prescribes. So they're showing you that we are in charge. We have the ultimate power to make and enforce our own laws. That's what people voted for. So there should be another slide coming. Yeah, so the word jurisdiction is really important here. So I've gone over this, but now just to really show people how it really comes together, why that word jurisdiction sits in that last slide that I just showed you guys. So it comes from the invention of jurisdiction, which derives from the Latin jus or juris, meaning law, and the Latin verb dictere, so that means to speak or to say. So thus jurisdiction literally means to say what is law, or what law is. So the word jurisdiction creates the idea that a superior and inferior, there are superior and inferior beings, where the superior possess divine knowledge. So if you think about the Bible, it even says, the new one, the exoteric one, it says the government is ordained by God, right? That's this. And the inferior, that's us, right? Hence, the superior have the right to behave like gods because they can just say or speak what the law is and what it's not. And because they're superior, they get to speak the laws, and we, the inferior, we're under their spoken control. And that's what happened when they did that act, right? They created a pantomime that gave everyone the impression that they are the authority. So I'm hoping that sort of helps people understand. So we can probably move on to the next one.
Roger that.
So you can see what I've underlined, right? So who's paying for it? It says, shall receive such remuneration as the Parliament may fix. So they've created their own courts. Now they're paying the people they want working for them. So what are the chances these people working for them are going to be acting in the service of the people?
Not high.
Which is being demonstrated today. I mean, it's been there the whole time. We just haven't suffered enough. And then what else have I underlined here? The High Court shall have jurisdiction. I'll just explain that. With such exceptions and subject to such regulations as the Parliament prescribes. You see how it's all about what Parliament decides. It's all there in front of you, right? And then what does it say at the bottom? The Commonwealth may appeal. Commonwealth man, so me and you, we get to appeal only by who? By the Queen in Council. So what they're saying is that remember how I said the monarch, that slide I showed you? The monarch cedes their sovereignty, right? So they do not have the power to make and enforce laws. But here, look at that. They're saying that if you want to make an appeal, it's to the Queen in Council. So who gets to have the supreme power? The Queen in Council. But they can't do that. You know what I mean? So they've shown you. It's just because the people were absent of knowledge that they fell for this, because they didn't understand what true democracy is and what the actual defining principle of democracy is. They were missing that knowledge. So if you see it here, it says sovereignty is preeminence. So that just means the supreme and independent power expressed through the making and enforcing of laws. So we can see Parliament just handed it to itself. And that sits in alignment with what happened in 1689, when they took sovereignty away from the office of sovereign and they granted it to themselves. So that was already in play well before Australia was even an idea in the British constitutional monarchy structure. And did you want to read this one about moral relativism, Carl?
Sure, moral relativism. Maybe not, because you're not wearing headphones and I'm getting that bounce back from your monitors.
Oh yeah, I might just put my earphones in. So do you want to go read it while I put my earphones in?
The belief that there is no such thing as objective truth that is inherent in nature, i.e., that which is universally discoverable and verifiable. Therefore, man, through government, has the right to arbitrarily decide or create what is a right and what is not.
So moral relativism is what we've been operating under without realizing it. And last week, if you guys remember, I did show a slide about the 4 tenets of Satanism, and this is the second one. So that's the whole point of government as we've been running. If you believe the 1297 Magna Carta is what's going to be your protection, this is what you've actually agreed to. That you're handing over your own ability to be able to discern the difference between what is right and what is not. You're handing it over to someone else to decide for you. And who is that someone else? It's just a bunch of men and women acting in concert. That's all it is. And you're just handing it over to them, saying that they know better than you. And that's what that Act 1901, Commonwealth of Australia, Constitution of Australia Act is. It's the belief in moral relativism, not that we all have an inherent understanding and knowledge of what is right and what is not. So this is what you voted for.
You touched on a point from 1689. You named that as the date where sovereignty was stolen.
Well, it was done officially through, it's been in action the whole time, but officially through like any kind of documentation, it was done that way then. So then it was made like a thing that, you know, grants people their rights. That doesn't exist. You can't have your rights granted to you. No one has that power. It doesn't exist in nature. But that's what that did. So it was another mind trick where people were led to believe that, you know, their rights can be written in by who it is they elect to serve them. I mean, that's absurd.
Yeah.
And they just didn't know any better. So here we go. We're back again, you know, with the perception of truth versus to inherent truth, right? You know, the people didn't know any better, so they're vibing off this low frequency because they're crossing that truth line because their belief is so out of whack that rarely crosses that truth line. And we need to get everyone up to the top line, the high frequency, where our beliefs are crossing the truth line more often. And that's what I'm hoping that tonight's episode will help people get into that space. So did you want to read this one as well?
Equality under natural law. Government is nothing more than men acting in concert. The morality and value of government, like any other association of men, will be no greater and no less than the morality and value of the men comprising it. Since government is nothing but men and women, its inherent authority to act is in no way greater or different than the authority to act of individuals in isolation. Government has no magic powers or magic authority not possessed by private individuals. Let he who asserts that government may do that which the individual may not assume the onus of proof and demonstrate this contention. That's from Chris Lyspooner.
Yeah, that's a play on words. I reckon that's Lysander Spooner, just personally. So it just goes back to whatever cannot happen between two individuals cannot happen between a group of individuals and one individual. It's just not possible. It doesn't exist in nature. If it doesn't exist in nature, the only way it can happen if it's a mind trick. And that's what the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution is. It's a mind trick. It's fooled people into believing that which they can't discover in nature and getting them to accept that as a truth and a reality. So I just wanted to... Sorry, carry on.
Sorry. No, you're right. Keep going.
I just wanted to really see if I can help people, you know, really get to the heart of how they've been fooled and how they so easily will accept hearing things that play to their biases. Well, the truth is not about your biases. That's why this is the real deep work here, right? The work is that we are all have a capacity for inner reflection. So this is for us to really look into ourselves, right? And stop coming up with reasons why we're right and look into where things can be discovered that's universal, that are not in a space where we can argue. Like, so if I tell you the sunflower is yellow, I don't need to say it to you again because you can discover that in nature.
Yeah.
So this is what this is about. It's what you can discover that's verifiable by all of us. And if you believe that, you know, you were meant to be a good slave, then yeah, go ahead and say that the 1297 Magna Carta is what, you know, we protects our rights and what we live under, and grants us our rights. Yeah, you can say that for sure, because you're saying someone grants you your rights, not that they're inherent in nature. And so, do you want to read this one as well, my friend?
What can government do? Government can create a set of rules termed legislation that govern its behaviour on how it conducts itself, a fiction, administering the will of its creator, the people. Legislation deals with the temporary, therefore it can be amended or repealed, where law deals with permanence, therefore cannot be changed.
So, like I said earlier, right, government is not bound by the previous government. They can change any legislation because it's not permanent, it's temporary. It's just how they're meant to administer their function. That's all it's for. It's not meant to be how they control the people. And so if you accept the 12...
Is that the theory?
Sorry, I missed that.
That which government makes can be unmade.
Yes, because they're a fiction. They don't exist in nature. You can't find government in nature. So anything they create can be reversed. We've been trained into believing that once they pass something, that's permanent. That's not democracy. That we've been running inverted totalitarianism the whole time and not been aware of it. So I just saw this comment here, says the same could be said about Magna Carta and all other texts. Well, hang around, Aaron Strike, and we'll see if you can say that later once we get into more depth. So here you have it again, right? So if you want to look at the crown, have a look at that crown, right? The one on the line, the same one that's here that says supplied for the public service, right? That's the crown of St. Edward's. That's a corporate crown. That's the one that belongs to the Vatican. So this whole document is owned by the Vatican. So, you know, is that what you want to be under the control of? Then keep using this, because that's why we're here today, doing this. You know, going through all this suffering, this agonizing suffering. You know, all of us.
Yep.
It's because of this, because we didn't know any better. Feel free to read this one if you want to.
There's no such thing as a right to prevent others from exercising a right, since rights are actions in the service and advancement of all life. The claim over the rights of another is called slavery and stems from a belief there exists a chosen few born with the divine right to rule, hence the existence of self-appointed gods that create rights for others. Therefore, they have the power to revoke those rights.
Yeah, so that's what that legislation was, guys, that 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. That was exactly this. That was everyone agreeing to that they have rulers and masters, and they get to decide for their servants what they can and cannot do. That's what you agreed to. So, yeah, we can move on if you like, huh?
Think in a bit. Just, it's, I think there'll be a few people whose heads will be spinning a bit about now.
Well, this is really important because a lot of people, I'm guessing, haven't heard this word. So I might read this one.
Yeah, get into it.
So, nescience versus ignorance. So if you think about conscience, it's got science in it. This word's got science in it as well, but it's got net in front of it. So it means the absence of science. So it's the absence of knowledge. So it just means not to know. Nescience from the Latin verb nesciere, to not know because knowledge was absent or unattainable. So we can say back in 1901 that the people were nescient, right? They didn't have the knowledge. It was kept from them. But then there's a level of knowledge that they would have had, but that was their gut instinct, which they suppressed, and that's ignorance. So that's from the Latin verb ignorare. So that means to know, even though necessary information is present, but that information has been willfully refused or disregarded. So ignorance is the absence, or no, actually not the absence, but the refusal of accepting truth. And so that 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, right, to say that is, you know, your protection, Well, that falls in the category of ignorance, right? That's a real refusal to accept truth, unless you believe the truth is that you're a good slave. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, then just have a look at how life's turned out. That's all you need to see. Because if we had a fair income constitution where we were in charge, this wouldn't be happening. Do you want to read this one as well, Carl?
A man is no less a slave because he's allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years. Lysander Spooner saying some very important things about elections there.
Yes, so I'm guessing people probably connect with this one.
Yeah.
So Lysander Spooner was a lawyer not in the negative sense, but someone who really was trying to articulate law, not legal. And so he's really brilliant. If anyone wants to learn about natural law, this guy, the way he puts it, right, it just makes it undeniable. The way he phrases his thoughts, it's just put in a way where you can't argue with it. So I'd highly recommend looking up this guy and his book on natural law. So definitely worth a read. Okay, so this is called the trivium, right? This is how, most people would have heard the term rubbish in, rubbish out. Well, that's what that 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution was. It was rubbish in, and what have we gotten? What's been manifested in reality, right? Rubbish out, right? This is the output. So if the knowledge that's coming in, you need to be able to identify whether it's knowledge or whether it's a belief. And very few people know how to discern that. So, we're constantly getting information, but what's the mechanism by which we can process that information to understand whether it's knowledge or whether it's a belief? And this is where people don't have that capacity. And if you can't do that bit, that makes sure that you're going to be a good slave. And it's not available, guys. You go to university and they'll teach you certain levels of how to understand or read things, but they're only things they want you to know. But when it comes to the big life stuff, right, the stuff about natural law, they're never going to teach you that. They're still cult programming you to be a good input into their slavery structure. So they're only going to tell you the things they need you to know to be good at your job. That's all they need you to know. So you can keep their slavery system going. But you're not going to be taught how to discern knowledge from belief. And that's the starting point of how information comes into us. So as you can see here, it says, available information. The conscious potential knowledge that may be gathered, processed, understood, and acted upon by individuals. But how do you discern whether that's knowledge or whether it's belief, right? That's the trick. And there's a way that people can do it, but they've been taught the system we live under coaches them out of it. Because if you want to survive in the system, you have to suppress your consciousness. Otherwise, you won't survive. That's the system we live under, and we're all guilty of that. So then you've got the understanding part. So you look at it at a computer, right? A computer has a central processing unit. Well, that's what we have as well. So computers are built on us, the software. They've come from us, because who else created it? It was us. We did. So we've built it on what? What we know, of how we process information. So this is the decision-making process, right? So these processes take place in the human mind and are chosen by each individual based upon available information. Now, if the available information they've taken in is a belief and it's playing to their prejudices and biases, well, that's what they're going to process. But it's probably most likely got nothing to do with truth. And a lot of people are doing that. They're just processing that which they want to believe, not which is actually verifiable and discoverable. And then it goes up into what they call wisdom, which is the acting it out. So that's each individual's behavior is based upon the quality of their decision-making process, which in turn is based on the quality of their available information. So if you're getting rubbish info in, then your decision-making process on that's not going to be that great. And then what is going to be the output? And then all we have to do is look at what's happened with these mandates, right? And what people have accepted. They've got rubbish information, they've been rubbish at processing it, and then their actual, what they've actioned in reality has been what? Being good slaves. So here we are in chaos, families are torn apart. People's lives have been just messed up in ways that they never could have conceived.
Yeah.
And that's what's been manifested in reality. So this is the quality of the conditions which manifests in any society based on the aggregate. So that's the collective, the quality of the aggregate behavior. And the quality of the aggregate behavior comes from the quality of what they accept as truth. And unfortunately, that quality has been really poor. If it wasn't, we'd be living in a totally different way than what we are today, guys. And this is called the trivium of knowledge, right? This is how people get controlled. If they don't know this system, right, they won't teach you this at school. If they don't know this system, but you know where they do teach you this? In private schools. So have a think about that, guys. You will learn this in private schools. And where do all the politicians come from?
Yeah, not too many public schools. Well, Albo went to a public school.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a few other things that happen in there as well. Some of those private schools are public schools are affiliated too.
Quite true.
So now we move to what I've been talking about for ages, because this is at the center, right? Order followers. So we have a look at this picture, right? And you have a look at what they got on their faces, right? And this is the way I explain it. So if you put a nappy on your face, right? The only place people that put nappies on their bodies are infants and elderly, right? And they both don't have control over their bodies. So if they've got a nappy on their face, what does that say about what control they have over themselves? And that's who you've got coming and enforcing what? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's showing you right there who they are. They're people who live in fear. And that's who's coming after you to tell you what to do. Because you'd never put that on your face. You'd never stop yourself from breathing if you weren't in fear. And so they have to be programmed, right? So why do they take them aside? Why don't they let them still interact with community when they're being sent off to the academy? Why do they set them aside for a certain amount of time? Because they separate them, and then they separate them in order to teach them how to conform with what? With their way of doing things, with their belief systems. And then they indoctrinate them through what? Repetition. Because like I said, if I tell you a sunflower's yellow, I don't have to tell you again. But if I tell you it's green, I've got to find a way to make sure that you accept that. So I have to indoctrinate you. I have to keep repeating the lie. And then I need to traumatize you to do that. And that's what happens to these people. That's what they sign up for, just so they can get a good paycheck, or what they think is a good paycheck.
I'd be interested if we have any veterans in the chat tonight. I think anybody who's been through basic training would identify with all of those 4 points as essentially what they go through for the first 3 months.
Yeah, well, that word basic training, I love that word because it actually is telling what they're doing. They're training you to be basic. Because what else do you train? We train animals, right? We don't need to be trained. We are free individuals. We don't need training at all. We know innately, what's okay and what's not okay. We don't need to be trained for anything. But you do need to be trained to do the things that are not okay. And this is the way it's done, through cult programming. So it happens the same in the military as it does in the police. Now let's compare that with the constable. So when you're ready, Carl, I'm more than happy for you to read this one.
The constable must fully know natural law and the common law of the land. They can only be elected by the people from within their community and are only answerable to their chief constable and the people, but never to government, because a constable can only operate within the jurisdiction of natural law and common law of the land.
So you think about that, right? If this was a system we were running, would we need to send them off into a private institution where they get programmed? Because who, if they had full knowledge of natural law, would ever believe that's a way to go about learning anything? Because they already know it. They don't need that. They wouldn't be armed with all these vests and anything like that, right? They would just be like people that live in your community who we really respect because they have inherent knowledge of how to keep the peace. And if you don't understand natural law, you don't know how to keep the peace. It's just that simple. They go into those institutions to teach them the opposite, and which we're going to get into later. And they're a private recruited army just from local people, but they're there to enforce something that goes against natural law. They're not here to actually keep the peace. That's the illusion that they've created for us. But you'll see when we get into the symbology of just what's really been happening. So if you see here, right, this is the pentagram So if you have a look at it, it points to 5 different elements, right? So you've got, at the bottom, it's got fire. So that's the symbol of the phallus as well, the male phallus. And then water. Water's called the chalice. That's also the symbol of the female one for the womb. And that's really important because in symbology, they split that up into the different hemispheres of the brain, the male and the female. And then you've got earth, air, and then you've got the spirit, the eight wheeled circle. And the spirit is your pineal gland. That's your capacity for divinity, your innate understanding of natural law and how to harmonize with it. That ascension into that high level of consciousness. And so if you have a look in the pentagram, you have a look at the shape inside it, right? You can see that's a pentagram. And if you were to draw externally, drawing all those points together, you'd have another pentagram in straight lines. So it's quite a geometrical feature. And cult symbology is all about geometry, right? But making use of it. And then if you have a look onto the right-hand side, you can see how the 2 legs, right, they join together to the trunk, same with the arms. So it's about getting the extremities to come in together and unify into where? Right up to the top. And that's your spirit. So you're using all these limbs, they're all there to act in the service of your spirit. That's the pentagram in the correct form, right, where the tip is at the top. So what it does, it represents sovereignty in the sense of self-mastery. So if you've watched the previous videos, you would have seen one of the definitions of sovereignty is the expression of self-mastery. So, this is about the spiritual nature of man, that we inherently understand how to live in peaceful, harmonious coexistence and how to contribute to the quality of life, not only for ourselves, but for our neighbors as well. That's what that pentagram represents. So we can go to the next one if you like, Carl.
I never knew that about the pentagram. I can tell you all about the inverted pentagram, but I never knew the history of the correct way.
Yeah, it's one of those things, when you get discovery, it's a wonderful thing. Yeah. So here, if you have a look, what I spoke about, if you had a look at the fire sign, that was the phallus, the pointing upwards, and then the water sign, that was the chalice, which is, the womb. And so what they've done in cult symbology is they split the brain up into 2 hemispheres, and they have the intuitive part, which they call the feminine. They color that blue. And then the intellectual part, which is the masculine. So that's your logic, your analytical. That's the will, the drive, the energy behind doing something. Where the feminine is about creativity, compassion, care, right? So it's about bringing those 2 together and creating a balanced outcome. But if you split and you're too much in one or too much in the other, you're unbalanced. And that's the whole role of what police are. And we'll get into that as we go further. They're in an permanent, unbalanced state. So if you have a look here, this is the inverted pentagram, right? So it's inverted. So you have a look, the man is on his head. And then his legs are up, right? So most people, when they give the peace sign, it's the 2 fingers up. Well, that's the 2 legs up. So it actually symbolizes death. So most people don't realize in cult symbology, when they've been doing the peace sign, they've actually been symbolizing the death of the spirit.
Wow.
And so with the goat's horns, right, that's showing you the duality that's thrust up in defiance, right? Instead of us being unified, we're split. There's an us and a them. That's what the police are there to do. They're to enforce there's an us and a them. That's the splitting of the 2 parts of the hemispheres, right? The blue and the red. Now, what color lights do the police have on their cars?
Blue and red.
So their cult masters are mocking them. It's right above their heads in their cars, right? Saying they're constantly jumping from one to the other. They're never in balance. You'll see those lights. They go one to the other, one to the other. And this is how they're showing us, except we just don't know it. And then you've got the ears and the chin of the goat here, right? So that's the consciousness trinity, but it's denying it. So the three aspects of your consciousness, thoughts, actions, and emotions, being down the bottom, that's showing that it's denied. So the man is upside down, denying those aspects of themselves to work in unity. Because the living stand on their feet, you know what I mean? So this is inverted spirituality, right? This is carnal instincts of man. That's what that goat or that inverted pentagram stands for. The carnal instincts of man, our base beast level of how we can just be, real, just virtually like an animal that doesn't have, and I'm not saying all animals, but, an animal doesn't feel any remorse. It doesn't have, any idea about its actions and what the consequences of them are, that's what this represents, the inverted pentagram. It's the death of the soul. So we can probably go to the next one. So this is the whole splitting, right? The left and the right brain, or the hemispheres, being split. This is how we get controlled. So the police, they jump from one to the other, right? So if you can see here, it says if you're too much in the feminine, that's naivety, blind belief, religious extremism, solipsism, unworthiness, self-loathing, order follower. A willing slave. This is slave think, right? If you're too much in that side. So when you're a police officer, what are they doing? They're taking orders. So what? They're an order follower, right? And then what do they do when they go and act out those orders? They go into the right hemisphere. On the left side, sorry, not the right side. And that's when they're too much, in that rigid state. That's where they're a master. They're acting out like a master. They're dominating you. So they never go in balance. And then if you look at this checkerboard floor, right, the ones you see in the Freemason lodges, that's what that represents. It's the duality, right? There's no balance. So when you enter into their lodges, they're saying that you're starting at that base carnal level, that you can't tell the difference between what's okay and what's not okay, right? You need to be told. So you're incapable of discerning that. You're not in balance. Your mind is always jumping from one to another, from blind servitude to acting out things that are horrific. That's what they're telling you, that there's only two options here, master and slave. Sometimes you're the master, sometimes you're the slave. So that's what police are. When they're acting out on their orders, they are the masters. They're enforcing their will on you. And when they're taking their orders...
And the checkerboard pattern is on every police car as well, every police sign.
Yeah. It's hopefully starting to come together, how the police are being mocked and their cult masters are mocking them, showing them just how little they, just that they're just there. They're like they're their dogs, you know what I mean? And we'll see the symbology of that coming up. So if you have a look, right, where's the pentagram, right? It's upside down. So there's the leg split, right, the duality. And then what sits on top? The Roman crown, right, the corporate crown. So who do they serve? It says uphold the right. Well, whose right are they upholding? What's at the top? That's what they're upholding. Yeah, the right of the Vatican. So they're just showing you everything, of what they're doing. And you have a look on their hats. Where does that sit when it's on their hats? Right over the pineal gland. So they're showing you, right? And we'll see that in the next slides, I'm hoping, that symbology. So if you have a look here, you've got, I don't know if people can recognize it, but that's meant to be Obama in the silver. So that's what the cult does, right? They wear masks. That's part of their ritual humiliation. And then look at their good order followers, right, on the other side there. And what's he got wrapped around his brain? The checkerboard floor.
Yep.
So what they're saying is these people are in that split dual belief structure, right? That they're highly credulous and they're willing to obey their masters. On one end, that's all they can do. On the other end is they can actually act it out and do the most wicked things. So they're actually mocking them, and they've wrapped it around their brains. And then right where their pineal gland is, right at the top, the center, your capacity to ascend into your true spiritual nature, right? What's in front of it? The inverted pentagram. So they're saying these are soulless, dead flesh bots. That's what they're doing. Yep. And then if you have a look at this picture here, you've got the man in the top hat, right? That's the master holding the lead of the police officer. And he's eating out of his bowl. And what's in his bowl? Fake fiat currency. So they're saying, for the sake of some fake fiat currency, these men and women are willing to do the most unimaginable things and suppress their consciousness in order to do it, to get that fake fiat currency. Now that's baseline consciousness right there. And they're mocking them. They are mocking all the police because they put you in those vehicles that are wrapped in the checkerboard, that's wrapped around your head. Like the symbology is right in right in front of your pineal gland. They are laughing at you guys. They call you their dogs. And you think about the military, right? The military wear what? dog tags.
Yeah,
Now, here's
true.
an experiment, guys. If you don't believe me, I want you to go into your search bars and type in Henry Kissinger quotes on the military. So go do that now and then tell me what you get back. And then once you do it, actually, once you get the search up, hit images because it'll be quicker. You'll be able to see it come up quicker. So that's what I'd love you guys to so it's not me making it up, right? This is verifiable, it's discoverable. Henry Kissinger quotes on the military. And then you'll be able to see what he says, because they say he was one of the top quote people. Not quote people, cult programming types. And he comes out and overtly says it. He doesn't even hide it.
Yeah.
So if you guys
Still
want to
doesn't
do
hide.
that, no, correct. But if you guys want to do it and post it in chat, I'd love to see what comes out. So do you want to read this one, Carl?
Mental slavery is the worst form of slavery. It gives you the illusion of freedom, makes you trust, love, and defend your oppressor, while making an enemy of those who are trying to free you and open your eyes.
So you think about if you were to go up to a police officer and tell them everything that's been discussed here tonight, where do you reckon they'd go? Do you reckon they'd be accepting of it? Or they think that
No.
you've got mental problems? You know, so that's what that's saying, is that they refuse to see it. But here's the part, right? What doesn't get expressed is a ton of police officers have PTSD. A ton, just like the military. And if they didn't have a conscience, they would never get PTSD. If there was nothing innately that they understood that they were doing, you know, that was harming others, if they didn't innately understand that, they'd never get PTSD. It'd be just like a robot that you can program and they go off and do it and they feel no remorse, they feel no guilt, they feel nothing. They just carry on doing it. So that's your evidence, right? That we have a capacity for spirituality. And the only reason you're getting PTSD is if you suppress that in order to what? To keep your job. And the only reason you want to keep your job is because you're in a state of fear. And there's the explanation. The other thing is, have a look at the color of the police uniform. It's blue. Remember what the color of the brain hemisphere that's blue is? That's that real rigidness. So they're even mocking you even more. And if you want to see how else they do it, guys, go get a square, just a square, and then put another square on it and turn it at 45 degrees. You'll have an 8-pointed star. Then go have a look at how many police badges have an 8-pointed star, especially in the UK. And that inside, when you draw that, you get an octagon. And so their symbology is more than not just the pentagram, it's also the octagon, guys. And where does cage fighting happen?
In the octagon.
And what do they do with each other? Are they really friendly and kind to each other in there?
Gladiatorial.
So they're tearing each other to bits, right? And who comes in to watch it?
The slaves.
I see Jinder Lee's found it. So she's put it in the chat. Military men are dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns in foreign policy. So that's what Henry Kissinger said. So thank you for that, Jinder Lee. So, you know, they're showing us, they're mocking us all the time that, you know, we're willing to be our base slave animal. We're willing to do that willingly. You know, and we participate in it. And then everyone comes and cheers us on. And so we think we're doing that voluntarily. That's who we are. We've been programmed into it. And this is the hard work, guys. So Aleister Crowley, a lot of people are going to have, I imagine, are going to have a bit of an issue with this. But he was actually telling you something really important because he understood natural law. He just knew how to manipulate it to work against people. You know, that's what these magicians are. They know about natural law, they just manipulate it. So what did he say? He said, the absolute rule of the state shall be a function of the absolute liberty of each individual will. So if you believe that you need to be told what to do, then that's what you get. How many people say, well, if we don't have government, how are we going to do anything, right? Well, what kind of government do you mean first, right? Do you mean the authoritarian one? Or do you mean the one that's in the service? So you need to know which one you mean. And one that there's checks and balances that we, the people, are in charge of, not that they're in charge of themselves. You know, it's like putting the foxes in charge of the hen house. That's what that 1297 Magna Carta is. It's the foxes in charge of the hen house because they wrote it.
Yeah.
Same with the 1901 Commonwealth Constitution. You know, who wrote it? The Foxes wrote it. And they granted everything they needed to dominate us in there and made us believe that we have some sort of protection inside that.
Yep.
So love is the law, love under will, right? That's a really important thing to understand. Did you want to read this one, Carl?
Equality under natural law. Everyone has the exact same rights. No one has any more or less rights than anyone else. Also, since rights are not created by humanity, and since they are the birthright of humanity, gifted to us by the creator of the universe, no human being or group of human beings is actually capable of granting rights to anyone else, nor is any human being capable of revoking rights from anyone else.
So I don't really know if there's much more I can add to that one, how much disagreement there'd be in that one. That's pretty much it. So again, the 1901 Commonwealth Constitution stands in the face of that. So like I said, this is why this knowledge is really important, right? You need to know what law is. You need to know the difference between that and legislation. You need to be able to define what a constitution is, right? Is a constitution something Parliament can write? It's really important to know why they can or cannot. And the difference between legislation that's masked to look like constitution versus to an actual constitution. You know, so you need to know who actually has the authority to write a constitution, right? And whoever said earlier about that the Magna Carta 1215 is no different, well, that's because you don't actually understand who has the authority to write one and how the Magna Carta was written and who the barons were acting to actually, because you don't understand. My guess is you don't understand the feudal structure at the time. Who they were actually acting for, because they had a mutual arrangement, obligatory arrangement with the people. You know, they had their own armies, but they needed to look after the people. Otherwise, it was going to be a revolt. And so they were in a position where they were getting crushed out of existence. So they needed to stand up for their people to actually make sure that they themselves would be able to survive. Because their own people are how they got. When I say their own people, the people that they had working on their lands and stuff, they were dependent on each other. There was a mutual relationship there of dependency. So they couldn't just allow them to be obliterated. Did we just jump a slide then, Carl?
No, just got to natural law.
Okay. So did you want to read the difference between natural law and legal?
Natural law is based upon principles and truth inherent to creation. It's up to your free choice to harmonize with it through knowledge of it and its understanding. It's universal, eternal, and immutable. It exists and applies for as long as the universe exists and cannot be changed, also termed negative rights or natural rights. In the legal, it's mostly based upon dogmatic beliefs, which are constructs of the mind. It's complied with, mostly not by free choice, but due to fear of punishment. It differs with location and changes with time based upon the whim of the legislators, called moral relativism, also termed positive rights or legal rights.
Yeah, so this is how we got hoodwinked, right? We got told about legal rights being our protection. So that's what's positive rights. That means it's someone else who's not you, who believes they get to make up what the law is, the 1901 Commonwealth Constitution of Australia, and then they get to tell you what your rights are. And so they're not really rights if they get to tell you what they are. Someone else is setting the limits of what you can and cannot do. That's not rights. This is how that sorcery happened. Because that's someone's will being imposed on you if they're granting you your rights, something they have no actual power to do. They need to trick you into believing it, and that's what the whole legal system is. It's one massive mind control system. Where, like I said earlier, like if I tell you the sunflower's yellow, I don't need to repeat it. With the legal system, they're constantly got to repeat that this is a fact, because lies need to be repeated to be believed. But anything to do with nature doesn't. You know, and if you have a look, right, you have to comply with it, and it's done by fear of punishment or fear of reward even, if you want to follow the legal, right? And you think you've got rights then. But anything to do with nature, there's just acceptance because you can verify it. And
Absolutely.
that's what people need to be able to discern the difference, right, of how this is done. You go into their courts, you're going into a legal system, a mental construct that's got nothing to do with anything you can verify. It's all these word games that they play with you. And so negative rights, if you have a look at this next slide, right, it's all about what you are not to do if there is to be peace. So you are not to cause any loss. You are not to cause any harm. You are not to lie or deceive anyone. Right? You are not to violate peace. They're the things, that's why it's called negative rights. What needs to be absent in order for us to live harmoniously. Where legal rights, that's about setting the limits that curtail your freedom and what you're allowed to do. So if someone's deciding for you what you're allowed to do, the best you get is liberties. You know, like when you're in the army, you get liberty to leave. You know, it's that kind of, that's the system. And we've all been conscripted into their citizenship, where they gave us what? Our legal rights of what we're allowed to do, which are not rights, because you can't grant rights. You know, so when you walk into those courts, that's what you're doing. That's what you think is there for your freedom. You know, and do you have to pay to go in their courts? Yeah, it's a business. Absolutely. Now, we just hit the 1 hour mark, Carl, so I'm just thinking we might need to leave the rest for another week.
Well, we've only got a few more slides to go. Let's kick on.
Oh, is that not too many?
Well, we'll see how we go. We'll give it another 15 minutes, see if we can get through it.
Alrighty. So, like I said, guys, I'll keep bringing this one up because it's really important to be able to notice the difference between truth, right, as you can witness, versus to your belief. And we rarely are going to be in that flat line all the time because we're just not capable of that because we have our own preferences and biases. But it's how often we cross over that and intersect with that line of truth. The higher we vibrate, the more times we cross over. So did you want to read this one, Carl?
Common law is a set of non-negotiable conditions necessary to preserve the natural flow of giving and receiving from the heart.
So we are naturally what's called natural givers. We give freely from the heart. That's who we are. But for us to do that, you know, without any interference or impedance, there needs to be a set of conditions in play for us to do that, right? So there cannot be any loss, there cannot be any harm, cannot be any deceit, and there must be peace, right? Then our nervous system can stay in that relaxed state, and we can be who we innately are. But once there's any breach in those four, our nervous system escalates, and we're not capable of being that natural giver. So common law just aims, if you really understand it, to preserve those conditions necessary for us to be in that natural state of flow of giving and receiving from the heart. So that's all that common law aims to do. And that's all we're bound to. Because as soon as there's a breach of any one of those things, we all pay.
Absolutely.
Government
is illegal only if it is trying to impose some kind of compulsory arrangement upon the people other than being judged by their peers in a natural justice tribunal, because imposing any other arrangement would require an individual contract with every citizen. Will Kite is a pretty clever man.
Yeah, so I'm really grateful to Will. These are just some of the ways he's expressed trying to understand and questions he's posing to just help people trigger their thought process about what a constitution is, right? And what can be imposed on us and what's for them. And so if you think about it, right, the only way that they have any authority is if they're doing that which we require, right, and they're helping that along. So if we require a natural justice tribunal, then yeah, they've got the authority to help that, you know, and facilitate that for sure. That's it, nothing else. Because that's all we require to live in peaceful, harmonious coexistence, that we have access to natural justice. And if they're there for that, that's all we need them for, you know, and obviously to fulfill a certain function.
The constitutional rule of law. Democratic rule of law would require the people to be left within their free-floating natural state, free to do anything that they like, except that which would be judged unacceptable by their peers in a natural tribunal. So this is where Will's talking about you can basically go off and do anything you like unless it is deemed an unacceptable practice, and let's say pedophilia would be a great term for that, or I don't know, domestic violence, theft, just about any law you can think of, or any rule you can currently think of, would be covered by this, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that's how we remain free, in our natural state, is we are aware of the conditions that are necessary to keep that harmonization going, and we know what happens when it's breached, and this is all we require, just our consciences, because our consciences, like I said, if we didn't have one, no one would get PTSD, so they know when actions are in alignment with that which is going to serve life, and we know when our actions are in alignment that takes from life. We don't need to be educated in this. We are pre-stamped with this knowledge inside us.
Any arrangement for the construction of a state can only involve the definition of the government, or rather an administration. The Constitution itself becomes a rule book for the state administration itself, but not the people.
So you know how one of the questions was, what's a constitution? I'm hoping this is helping people understand this. All right, so you can't create rule books for us because we're free. But if we've got a system that has a lot of capacity to yield power, well, they're going to need to be constrained. So we need to have a rule book for them. And that's why it's really important to understand what the 1215 Magna Carta did. It created that rule book. And that was from the people, by the way they already lived and their customs, the way their traditions and customs could be preserved, was to make sure the administrative body never breached a certain boundary. That's why they put that together.
Yeah.
That everyone is equal under the law.
Yeah. The next one, the constitutional rule of law, to describe the Constitution as a contract with the people is incorrect. It is a one-sided contract that binds officers of the state, but does not bind the people, other than merely to agree to behave within the parameters deemed acceptable by the consciousness of the community around them. That allows the people to remain within natural justice, and the state to be the only thing that is bound by the rules of the Constitution.
Yep, so I'm hoping that's really helping people. I don't really have much more to add to that one. I think it really explains it really well. So, like I said, I'm really pleased that I've been able to engage with Will like this, and he's really helped me, put some questions out that other people can also ponder on themselves.
This is also the trinity of law.
Yeah, so we need to know how to actually enact our sovereignty, right? What is it that's going to preserve those conditions of no loss, no harm? The absence of those things, well, how can we preserve that? So this is what's enshrined in the 1215 Magna Carta, our natural justice tribunal, where we're assessing from consciousness. And so this is it. This is the Trinity. There's three aspects to it. There's the trial itself, where the accused and the legislation are both on trial. And the defining principle of democracy happens here at this trial, because the individual juror is the final arbiter of law. So you might have, out of those 12 jurors, you might have 11 that will believe the accused is guilty, but all it takes is one of those 12 to go, no, my conscience won't allow me to see that, because that's like saying I'm guilty, and what they're being made guilty of. So you could have 11 sociopaths in there, right? You just need one who's got a conscience they're attached to, and it's a not guilty verdict. That's how well this is done, because the highest priority is that an innocent man or woman remains free. So conscience is the only way to do that. And then you've got the annulment process, and then you've got the going after those who went and tried to breach our sovereignty. So that's, again, that line of truth, right? How do we enact it? How do we show it? How do we actually manifest it in reality? How do we get into that high vibrational state? What are the actions required? Well, it's the Trinity of law. Trial by jury is the only place that can happen. So it doesn't matter who gets elected into service, because they'd never breach anything if they knew what was coming for them, and which is hanging if they do breach it. That's how severe this is. This is saying that our sovereignty is not up for negotiation ever. And here's the mechanism by which we are in charge of that. That we don't have police, we have constables.
Yeah.
And so here we go into truth. Did you want to read these, Carl?
Man's greatest fear is that there is only one universal singular truth. There's only one truth, and if you ignore it, you waste time.
So I love these two, right? So what people are really good at doing, they're being coached into, is believing that what they believe is right has to be right for everyone else.
Sure.
You know, because they don't go into, well, what's universally discoverable. They just go into what's comfortable for them, and then they enforce it on others. So, you know, you'll hear this, there's more than one way to attack the castle, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but which one's working? You know, that's the other one. You know, which one's actually working? If we don't unify, then how do we know?
Yep, true.
And the 1215 Magna Carta has Article 61, which is what unifies the people. It's a set of instructions of what we need to do to actually return and restore the rule of law. So last one here, I think this should be the last one. Is that right, Carl?
It is indeed. Love, openness to accepting knowledge. Knowledge to know truth. Truth, information that is universally discoverable that triggers clear direction in choosing actions that are in the service of life, also known as freedom.
So yeah, anything that doesn't lead to freedom for all is not come from knowledge, it's not come from truth, and it's not come from love. So that's a really simplified way to understand what those terms mean, because they all lead in one direction only, and that is freedom for all, because we're all bound to each other. We are mere life expressions, different life expressions of the same consciousness. And it's about how do we unify those three aspects of our consciousness, you know, the thoughts, actions, and emotions in service of freedom. Not for me, not for you, but for everyone. There's no such thing as freedom for some and slavery for others, and that's called freedom. You know, there's either freedom for all or slavery for all. There's no fence in the middle. And so it's about understanding what's required. There are requirements. It's not your opinion. It's actually required. And uncovering that. This is truth discovery. There's a process by which that happens. You know, so that's about being able to discern the difference between knowledge and belief. And very few people that I've seen are capable of doing that. And this is about trying to get us to that state where we can do that. We can discern the difference between knowledge and belief.
Another deep lesson, mate. There'll be a few people who'll be rattling our cages this week because you've certainly kicked the 1297 bucket fairly solidly.
Yes, I'm sorry, but it needed to be done, guys. So always welcome anything you want to put up to us with verifiable evidence. Always welcome it. You know, more than happy to bring whatever you've got to the table, and we're happy to help you scrutinize it.
Sorry, mate. Just having a bit of a cruise through some of the questions in the chat tonight. I think you've answered all the relevant ones. There's a couple that aren't really relevant to what we were doing tonight. But to whoever asked, is this my radio voice or my natural voice? I've got lots of radio voices. So this is, I guess, my natural voice. So whatever you're hearing is my natural voice. I guess when I get in front of a microphone and I'm telling the time and spinning records, it might sound a bit different, but haven't spun records in a few years now that I think about that. Now we just play them off a computer. But no, this is my natural voice. Has Fitz ever taken these sorts of statements to a mainstream radio talkback program? I think freely after speaking. No, I don't think Fitz has ever done that freely. I don't think that he'd get much of a show because the bloke on the other end of the microphone would have to have some modicum of understanding of what's going on. And I don't think there's too many of them in mainstream radio that have the vaguest idea of what he would be talking about. Yes, Ricardo will be on tomorrow night, 7:30. At least that's the current plan. He hasn't told me he's not turning up, so that's a good thing. Australia invented the scramjet. Yes, they did. That's very clever of you. I don't know what it had to do with us tonight, but that's very good. Inner city London is, well, now not in the control of the deep state. And just having a bit of a glance, see if there's anything more there that's worth. Can't see any questions there. So thanks, folks, I think, for all your involvement. We're developing a nice little community here, and it's great to see so many people helping each other. And I don't know if you're obviously doing a bit more with people during the week on your sites, Soundbite University, and I see that we've actually had people come into the chat earlier tonight thinking they were going to learn something new, but apparently you've already given this statement somewhere else, and they, this is the same bloke I was talking to today. So you're obviously getting the news out there, mate, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff, because it's so foreign, not because we don't know it, but because we haven't got an expression for it, sometimes it's actually valuable to hear it again. So I have no problem with repeating myself. So, just because of that fact, because you're not going to get it anywhere else. So sometimes it does require repetition. So yeah, I'm okay to do that.
Thank you, Fitz. Another great episode. Will we get off rights next week, or are we looking for a part 4?
I'm hoping that'll do it. Then there's options, right? Because there's the option of really understanding cult programming to a deeper level, and how it's actually done. There's that option, the whole gematria, that kind of stuff, to really understand how we're being controlled. So that's a lesson that's worthwhile knowing. And also the whole trinity and how many trinities there are, the power structures. That's also really important to understand how we're being controlled through those trinities. So there's also stuff about that needs to sort of come out so people can really see the veil, what's behind that veil, and to really understand how they believe they're in control, but really their strings are being pulled in ways they're not even aware of. So it's quite valuable stuff. So those options are available as well.
All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up tonight. Somebody asked me for a bit of an update on my housing situation. More urgent than ever, I would say, is the current update on the housing situation. So more urgent than ever. If anybody happens to know of a 2-bedroom minimum place and you don't mind a small dog that doesn't create any mess or carry on, please get in touch. My daughter and I would be very grateful. Fitz, love your work. What can I say? Look forward to doing it all again 7:30 next week.
Yep, it's always a pleasure, my friend. So I appreciate the opportunity to come out and share this knowledge.
Oh no, it's great. I love having you on, and we learn so much stuff every week about this. And it's important stuff. It's very deep. It's very hard, and sometimes you've got to go back and watch things, 2 or 3 times. It can be very difficult to understand and comprehend at times, and I know it hasn't been the easiest journey for me. Thanks, CPN. Like the idea of the shed, we might take you up on that. The way things are going. So yeah, it can be a lot to take in. So please watch them. Watch the videos over and over. Oh, and speaking of such, people have been in contact with me saying they can't find. I think it was episodes 3 and 4 of the Learning Centre on the Nun2K channel. I've uploaded both of those today to Nun2K. When we did them live, Nun2K I was banned off Nun2K at the time, so they never went up, and I never uploaded them for whatever reason. So they've been uploaded today. They should be in the library. You should be able to go and check those out if you haven't been able to find them on any of the other sites that they were on. My friend Fitz, once again, been bloody awesome. I'll be looking forward to talking to you again next Monday.
Yep, can't wait to do it all again, my friend. Thanks everyone who's tuned in. So hopefully you got some value out of it. And like and subscribe.
Yeah. Like and subscribe, folks. Thank you very much for your support. And if you've got friends, tell them to come in and do exactly the same thing. Like, subscribe, and come and join us next Monday night for lesson number 7, Magna Carta 12:15. I'm really looking forward to getting back into that. Cheers, Fitz. Have a good week.
Likewise. Good night, guys.